Well, as Mike Tyson once famously said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And Mike Bloomberg found out last night that's as true for politics as it is for boxing. It was his first time sharing a stage with his rivals, and they made the most of it.
I'd like to talk about who we're running against. A billionaire who calls women fat broads and horse-faced lesbians. And no, I'm not talking about Donald Trump. I'm talking about Mayor Bloomberg.
I think we need something different than Donald Trump. I don't think you look at Donald Trump and say we need someone richer in the White House.
You know what, Mr. Bloomberg? It wasn't you who made all that money. Maybe your workers played some role in that as well.
Well, Mike Bloomberg is worth an estimated $62 billion. Forbes magazine sticks him at 9th richest person in the world, and his rivals argue he's simply trying to buy his way to the presidency. Here's Mr. Bloomberg's response.
I'm a philanthropist who didn't inherit his money, but made his money. And I'm spending that money to get rid of Donald Trump, the worst president we have ever had. And if I can get that done, it will be a great contribution to America and to my kids.
Quite hard to find anyone saying anything too positive about how Mike Bloomberg got on. Here's a piece in the New York Times. Despite his billions, Bloomberg bust. His rivals were ready. He was not. Los Angeles Times, Bloomberg has a rocky debate debut, which I think we'd argue is even a little generous. Here's the New York Post. Black and boom, Warren leads brutal Mike beatdown, and Elizabeth Warren's attacks on Mr. Bloomberg went viral while the debate was going on. Lots of people were using the hashtag Warren for the win, and this was all very timely for Elizabeth Warren because she underperformed in the first 2 votes in Iowa and New Hampshire. This was her pushing back on that. Arguably her strongest attack was over non-disclosure agreements that Mr. Bloomberg's company agreed with female employees who accuse him of sexual harassment. Here's some of it.
Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
And this was Mike Bloomberg's response.
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is
Let me
that?
finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told.
That didn't go down well with the audience. If you've seen the longer version of the clip, Mike Bloomberg tweeted not long afterwards. He said, "Tonight I stood on a stage with a group of politicians. They talked because that's what they're good at. They went on and on about what they could and should do. I have built, I have created actual change. I have gotten it done. That's what I'll do for America," he says. Well, while that debate was taking place in Las Vegas in Nevada, not so far away, President Trump was hosting a rally in Phoenix, Arizona, and he too took aim.
And now they have a new member of the crew, Mini Mike. Mini Mike. No boxes. We call him no boxes. And I hear he's getting pounded tonight. You know he's in a debate. I hear they're pounding him.
Well, Julia Manchester is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Julia, good to have you on the programme. We looked ahead to this 24 hours ago, so what did you make of it?
You know, I was shocked at really how unprepared Bloomberg was. If you just looked at the headlines and the scrutiny that Bloomberg was under over the past week and some of the telegraphing of the attacks from some of the other candidates, mainly Biden, Warren, and Sanders, you know, Bloomberg should have known this was coming, and maybe he did, but his responses did not go over well. He seemed unprepared, agitated at times, and it just didn't go over well with the audience. Meanwhile, you had Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren both having really rock star nights there. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, someone who had a very less than stellar performance in Iowa and New Hampshire, really hitting it out of the ballpark in this debate. In fact, her campaign just announced that she's raised $5 million since this debate. Bernie Sanders, very much the front runner on stage, performing very well. So you saw this really contrasted with Bloomberg, who just really seemed to fall flat during the debate.
Don't go anywhere, Julia, because we should add not all the attacks were directed at Mike Bloomberg. Bernie Sanders is the current front runner for the Democratic nomination, and they came for him too.
His campaign relentlessly attacks everyone who asks a question or tries to fill in details about how to actually make this work.
We shouldn't have to choose between one candidate who wants to burn this party down and another candidate who wants to buy this party out.
The best-known socialist in the country happens to be a millionaire with 3 houses. What'd I miss here?
Well, you'll miss that I work in Washington, House 1.
That's the first problem.
Live in Burlington, House 2.
That's good.
And like thousands of other Vermonters, I do have a summer camp. Forgive me for that.
Julie, let's come back to you. I saw one very well-known American political commentator tweeting a moment ago saying, people keep calling me for comment and they're all asking about Bloomberg. Why aren't they asking about Elizabeth Warren? Why do we always frame this in the successes or otherwise of the male candidates? So let's focus on her. Why is she not making more progress in the polls, given she keeps doing these cut-through performances in the debates?
Well, it really leads you to question how much the debates actually matter. I mean, Amy Klobuchar, prime example in New Hampshire. You know, I would say that the debates very much helped her in New Hampshire, in that state in particular. She's a very good debater. However, she hasn't really been able to climb in the polls. So they kind of give you a burst of energy, but then I don't know if it's necessarily enough to take you farther. But I think she's really being droned out by Bernie Sanders, quite frankly. I mean, Bernie Sanders performed very well in Iowa and New Hampshire. Elizabeth Warren, a Massachusetts senator, did not perform well in New Hampshire, which is neighboring to Massachusetts. And we know that New Hampshire primary voters like to nominate New England candidates. So that's one strike against her. But I would say that overall, Bernie Sanders is just really shoring up this progressive support. And then you're seeing a number of moderates, Buttigieg and Bloomberg, both of their campaigns releasing memos over the past couple of days, really raising the alarm, ringing the alarm bells over whether Bloomberg or whether Sanders will drop out, saying that he is on the path to amassing the most delegates. So I think she has to compete with someone like Bernie Sanders, who simply just has way more support than she does.
And just briefly, if you would, Julie, we're up against the end of the programme. It's funny, we've come this far and we haven't talked about Joe Biden, who was the front runner for months.
Yeah, that really tells you something. I mean, Joe Biden is banking on a comeback in Nevada and South Carolina. His campaign has set very low expectations for him in Iowa and New Hampshire. But this is the demographic he should be playing well with, whether it's Latino or African-American voters, immigrants, a much more diverse voting base. But on the debate stage, it's no surprise he doesn't really perform as well as he does in one-on-one settings or more intimate settings. So I think it tells you something, though, that we're not talking about the former vice president of the United States, one of which who came from a very popular Democratic administration.